Amin was a man of unwavering devotion, deeply rooted in the teachings of his faith. Born into a family where religion was not just a practice but a way of life, he had grown up embracing the rhythm of daily prayers and the study of sacred texts. 5 times a day, he would kneel on his prayer mat, his forehead touching the ground as he recited verses he had memorized since childhood. For him, the act of worship was more than ritual. It was a connection to something far greater than himself. His life was structured around this devotion, and he took comfort in the certainty it brought. Every action, every decision was guided by the principles he had learned from a young age. The mosque was his refuge, a place where he found solace and community. Yet, beneath the surface of his steadfast faith, doubts began to stir, small, insistent questions that refused to fade. Before continuing, I wanted to ask you a quick favor. Our goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and your help is very important. So if you subscribe and comment subscribe, I will respond to your comment as a thank you. Thank you very much for your support. Now let's continue. In quiet moments, often late at night, Amin would find himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. He would wonder about the nature of salvation, about the eternal balance between his deeds and his sins. He had been taught that life was a scale, every action meticulously recorded and weighed. But what if his efforts were not enough? What if, despite his prayers and sacrifices, the weight of his shortcomings tipped the balance? These thoughts unsettled him, though he rarely spoke of them. To his family and friends, he was a pillar of faith, a man whose devotion seemed unshakable. Even as doubts crept in, Amin clung to the routines that had defined his life. He immersed himself in theological study, seeking answers in ancient texts and the wisdom of scholars. Yet, the more he read, the more questions seemed to arise. Amin's devotion was not devoid of curiosity. He often engaged in discussions about other beliefs, particularly Christianity, which fascinated him as a theological contrast to his own. To him, the idea of grace, salvation as an unearned gift, felt foreign, almost unfair. His faith emphasized effort, accountability, and striving toward righteousness. Grace seemed like a shortcut, one that undermined the discipline he valued so deeply. Still, Amin couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something he was missing, something beyond the pages of the text he studied so fervently. It was a feeling he couldn't fully understand, but one that would soon lead him down a path he never expected. Amin's life unfolded in predictable rhythms, each day mirroring the last. But on a seemingly ordinary morning, something unexpected disrupted that rhythm. He had traveled to visit his family in a nearby city, a trip filled with warm conversations and shared meals. The day began like any other, rising before dawn, performing his morning prayers, and immersing himself in discussions with his younger brother about theology and faith. As the afternoon sun stretched lazily across the sky, Amin felt a faint discomfort in his chest. It was subtle at first, a dull pressure that he attributed to a heavy meal or perhaps the heat of the day. He dismissed it as trivial, brushing aside his brother's concerned glance. Amin was not one to complain or draw attention to himself, especially over what seemed like a minor inconvenience. But by evening, the discomfort had intensified into a sharp, searing pain that stole his breath. His chest felt as though it was being squeezed in a vice, and beads of sweat gathered on his brow despite the coolness of the room. When Amin staggered, gripping the edge of the table for support, his brother's alarm turned to action. "We're going to the hospital," his brother said firmly, grabbing the car keys without waiting for Amin's protest. "It's nothing serious," Amin mumbled weakly, his voice strained. "Just indigestion. I'll be fine." His words rang hollow as he clutched his chest, his body betraying his stoic resolve. By the time they reached the emergency room, Amin's condition had worsened. His legs felt like lead, and every breath came with effort. The clinical efficiency of the hospital staff was a blur to him. Machines beeping, hurried voices exchanging medical jargon, and a needle piercing his arm as they rushed him into a treatment room. Amin barely registered the doctor's words as they explained his condition, a heart attack. The phrase echoed in his mind, foreign and surreal. Heart attacks happened to older men, to those who neglected their health, not to someone like him who prayed, fasted, and lived with discipline. It didn't make sense. As the pain reached an unbearable peak, Amin felt himself slipping into an eerie stillness. The room blurred, and the frantic voices of the medical staff began to fade. Darkness crept in at the edges of his vision, and with his last conscious breath, Amin whispered a prayer, his heart filled with both fear and surrender. Don't forget to subscribe to help the channel reach the 1,000 subscriber mark here on YouTube, and also comment from where and which city are you watching this video. Thank you for supporting the channel. Now let's continue. The darkness that enveloped Amin was not the void he expected. It was tranquil, silent, yet heavy with anticipation. He was aware that something had shifted, a separation from his body, his pain, and the world he had known. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, but the vividness of his sensations told him otherwise. Amin found himself floating, weightless yet present, observing the scene below him with an unnatural clarity. He saw his own body lying motionless on the hospital bed, surrounded by frantic doctors and nurses. Machines beeped in erratic rhythms, their tones urgent. His brother stood nearby, pale and trembling, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. Strangely, Amin felt no fear. Instead, a profound calm enveloped him. He tried to call out, to tell his brother he was still there, but no words formed. It was as though he existed in a state beyond sound and touch, tethered to a different reality. Then he noticed it, a light in the distance. It wasn't an ordinary light. It pulsed gently, alive and radiant, beckoning him with an unspoken promise. The light seemed impossibly far away and yet intimately close, as though it existed both within him and beyond reach. Amin felt its pull, gentle yet irresistible, and without fully understanding why, he moved toward it. As he drew closer, the light grew brighter, wrapping him in a warmth that defied description. It wasn't the heat of the sun or the glow of a flame. It was a presence, tangible and all-encompassing. The closer he came, the more he felt an overwhelming sense of love, a love that saw every part of him and yet did not condemn. Within the brilliance, a figure began to emerge. At first, it was indistinct, a silhouette against the radiance. But as Amin moved closer, the figure became clear. It was a man, clothed in light, his gaze piercing yet gentle. Amin felt as though this being could see through him, into every hidden thought and unspoken fear. The figure stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice resonated deeply, like a melody Amin had always known but never heard. "Amin," the figure said, his tone both commanding and compassionate. "You have questions. I have come to show you the truth." In that moment, Amin realized he was standing in the presence of Jesus. Amin stood frozen, the light around him pulsating with a life of its own. He had studied about Jesus, the prophet revered in his faith, but nothing could have prepared him for this. The figure before him radiated not just light, but a presence of infinite love and authority. It was as if every fragment of Amin's soul was laid bare under his gaze, yet he felt no judgment, only compassion. "You have questions, Amin," Jesus said again, his voice gentle but resonating with power. "And now you will see." Before Amin could respond, the light around him began to shift. It expanded and transformed, enveloping him in a new scene. He found himself standing in a place of indescribable beauty. The air seemed alive, filled with colors and sounds that transcended earthly comprehension. He saw people, countless souls, their faces glowing with joy and contentment. They moved freely, embracing one another with a love that seemed boundless. "This," Jesus said, gesturing to the scene, "is heaven. It is a fulfillment of God's promise, a place of unity, peace, and eternal love, not earned by deeds, but given freely through grace." Amin's mind reeled. Grace. The concept had always seemed foreign to him, even unearned. But here, it unfolded before his eyes, undeniable in its purity. He felt an ache in his chest, not pain but a longing. He wanted to belong here, to experience this peace forever. The scene shifted again. The warmth and light faded, replaced by cold darkness. Amin felt an oppressive weight settle around him. In the shadows, he saw figures, their faces etched with despair. They reached out, searching for something they could not grasp. Their cries echoed in the void, filled with anguish and regret. This, Jesus said, his voice tinged with sorrow, is hell. It is not a place of punishment imposed by God, but the absence of his presence. It is a result of rejecting the gift of salvation. Amin felt the weight of those words sink deep into his heart. He had been taught that hell was a place of divine wrath, but this was different. It was emptiness, a void where love could not reach. The pain of separation was far greater than any physical torment. Why do they suffer like this? Amin asked, his voice trembling. They chose separation, Jesus replied. God's love is offered to all, but not everyone accepts it. Salvation is a gift, Amin, not earned, but embraced through faith. The word struck him like a thunderbolt. His entire life had been about striving, about doing enough to tip the scales in his favor. But now, he saw the futility of it. No amount of effort could bridge the gap between humanity and God. Only grace could do that. Tears streamed down Amin's face as the weight of this realization bore down on him. How could I have been so blind, he whispered. Jesus stepped closer, his eyes filled with compassion. You were searching, Amin, and now you have found the truth. As the scenes faded, the light around them grew brighter, and Amin felt a profound sense of peace. Yet, he also knew this was not the end. Jesus wasn't finished with him. There is more to see, Jesus said, extending his hand. Will you follow me? Amin hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Deep within, he felt that everything he thought he knew was about to change forever. The light surrounding Amin seemed to expand endlessly, pulsating with purpose and warmth. He stood in silence, his heart heavy with the revelations he had just witnessed. Jesus looked at him with eyes that carried infinite understanding and compassion. Amin, Jesus said, his voice steady yet tender, you have been shown these truths not for yourself alone, but for others. There are many who live in darkness, bound by fear and doubt. You must go back and share what you have seen. Amin's chest tightened at those words. Go back? He asked, his voice trembling. But I don't want to leave. I want to stay here with you, in this peace. Jesus smiled, a look of both reassurance and resolve. Your time here is not yet finished. There is work for you to do. You will face challenges, rejection, and even fear. But remember this. I will be with you always. Amin felt a weight in those words, but also a strange comfort. He didn't fully understand how he could share something so profound, something that had shaken the very foundation of his beliefs. Yet, as he stood in the presence of Jesus, a quiet conviction began to take root within him. Before he could respond, the light around him began to shift. The radiance dimmed, and he felt a gentle pull, as though being drawn back into his physical body. The warmth of the light faded, replaced by the cool, sterile air of the hospital room. The sound of beeping monitors and hurried voices slowly came into focus. Amin opened his eyes. His body felt heavy, and his chest ached with every breath. But more overwhelming than the physical sensations was the clarity of his purpose. Jesus had entrusted him with a mission, and though fear lingered, Amin knew he could not remain silent. Amin spent the next few days recovering in the hospital, his body healing while his mind wrestled with the enormity of what he had experienced. The clarity of the vision lingered, but so did the fear. How could he explain what had happened? Who would believe him? The first person he confided in was his younger brother. Late one evening, as the hospital quieted, Amin asked him to sit. His brother listened intently as Amin recounted his experience. Leaving his body, the radiant light, meeting Jesus, and the visions of heaven and hell. Amin spoke with trembling hands but a steady voice, pouring out the truth that burned within him. His brother stared at him, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "Amin," he said cautiously, "you've been through so much. Maybe this was a dream, or your mind playing tricks on you during the attack." Amin shook his head, the conviction in his voice unwavering. "This was no dream. I know what I saw. I know who I met, and I know what I must do." Despite his brother's hesitation, Amin found strength in sharing his story. Over the next weeks, he began opening up to a few trusted friends. Hassan, his closest confidant, listened with skepticism but also with a quiet curiosity. "You're saying Jesus is more than a prophet?" Hassan asked. "That he's the way to God?" "Yes," Amin said firmly. "He showed me the truth. Salvation isn't earned, it's given. And it's for everyone." The reactions varied. Some dismissed him outright, accusing him of being delusional. Others were curious, asking questions but holding their reservations. Amin knew this was only the beginning. Each conversation was a step toward fulfilling the mission entrusted to him. As Amin healed physically, his conviction grew stronger. He could no longer keep his experience to himself. With every conversation, he realized the depth of his mission, to share the truth of what he had seen and felt. It wasn't just about recounting his encounter. It was about leading others to the light he had found. One evening, Amin stood before a small gathering of family, friends, and curious listeners. His heart pounded as he looked out at the expectant faces. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak, recounting his journey with honesty and vulnerability. He described the overwhelming love of Jesus, the visions of heaven and hell, and the gift of grace that had transformed him. The reactions were mixed. Some listened intently, their expressions contemplative. Others questioned him, their voices tinged with skepticism. A few left, unwilling to entertain what they saw as heresy. Yet, for every rejection, there was someone who stayed, someone whose curiosity outweighed their doubts. Amin found solace in a new spiritual family, a church that welcomed him with open arms. Surrounded by support and love, he began to see lives change, one conversation at a time. Though his journey was far from over, Amin knew he was never alone. The light that had called him continued to guide his every step. Leave your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that we can reach the mark of 1,000 subscribers. With your help, we will be able to reach this number as quickly as possible. Thank you for being there, and next time.